Good morning. Thank you for joining me. This is the second of the Growth for SMEs bid tender response workshops. So this one goes a little bit more detail. If you're lucky enough, if you were able to join the previous one, we went into kind of more broad views of why companies go to tender and why local authorities go to tender and how that process works at a high level. And that webinar will be available on the Brandwin website, or the Brandwin YouTube channel, if you weren't able to make that and see that. So this is a follow-on from that. So just very quickly about me, I am a Brandwin business tender specialist. This is over 10 years experience in both sides of tendering. So actually writing tenders, but also receiving tenders and evaluating them on behalf of various companies, including Capita. Okay, so this is, sorry about the typo there. That's my fault. It should be the 23rd of October last year. The foundation one we did, not the 223rd of October. Improve your bid responses today. And like I said, we're looking at best practice and excellence in selling, because you are selling. It's just a different form of selling when you're writing a tender response. So these are the elements that we'll cover. So why do organizers go to tender? A little bit more detail than we did last time. What getting the basics right looks like, and what makes up a winning bid, supported by the golden rules. And I'll just say now that there's one real golden rule. There's one overall golden rule when you're responding to tenders, which is to answer the question. You ask questions and answer them thoroughly. That is the best of all the advice you're going to get. That is probably the most important. Okay, but understanding the question observers, confirming your solutions and selling points, etc. These things are all going to go through as we go through. So there is quite a lot to get through. Feel free to ask questions as we go along, put them in the chat or in the Q&A, and I will happily answer as I go along. Okay, so just quickly about Brandwin. Brandwin been going quite some years now. I couldn't tell you the exact number of years Brandwin's been going. I've never actually asked, but so they work with local chambers and local authorities, universities, big infrastructure projects. And they deliver these support programs to small and medium-sized enterprises to help them grow in London, the Southeast. They're very proud, quite rightly, of the partnerships and collaborations they've built over the years. So they have a substantial amount of work they've done, which is all displayed here. So how to submit a winning bid. So initially engagement with procurement, that's something under the process within the program about how to do that. You will have been invited to answer an online bid capability questionnaire that basically assesses where you are at the moment, what your skills are, where kind of here, looking to improve your bidding skills. Sales enablement is the next part of the process, and eventually with tender advice. And here is something that I really implore that you take advantage of, which the two meet the buyer events, which are hugely valuable, where you actually get yourself in the room of the procurement departments of both local authorities and what's called tier one suppliers, so large suppliers, which are of great value to you. So Brandwin covers a whole load of different programs to support the growth of businesses in London, the Southeast, and we've delivered these previously. They're all available on the YouTube. Kind of, if you go into YouTube, type in Brandwin, you'll see all the previous webinars, and both on this subject and on others. Really fascinating stuff to get in there and help you with. This particular presentation will find its way onto the YouTube channel sometime over the next week. I sometimes get asked if we share the slides, but we don't share the slides, but we do put the webinar up on the YouTube channel. So the program benefits. So each participant, so all of you, will do an assessment of the bid writing skills, which are said by filling in the questionnaire. Knowledge and skills to implement best practice standards. 2 face-to-face meet the buyer events, like I said, of huge value. Access to 2 confidential one-to-one tender advice sessions. I'm fortunate enough to be able to deliver some of those, and they are bespoke to the individual and their business and what their plans are. And again, it's really valuable, because what we're giving you here is really good, but I suppose more generalized advice. For each individual business, they will have different elements to what they do and require different advice in order to take advantage of this process. So assistance to submit expressions of interest, which is the initial stage of anything to do with a tender. Support with writing and submitting bids, what a winning bid looks like, what's called a tender business model canvas, which is basically your plan forward for how you're going to approach this, your value proposition, design for procurement. The reason why it says design for procurement is a value proposition sometimes think is like, well, it's just our brochure. This is what we do. No, when it's designed for procurement, it needs to be very, very specific. And if you were on the previous session, I used the phrase, which means that. So if you think of anything that you do, we can do this, which means that. And the which means that is what difference it makes to the customer, the procurement, but they want to know how it benefits them. You get full engagement throughout the program from Branduin with regular and ongoing feedback. So it's a really, really valuable thing, really to take advantage of as much as you possibly can. So very quick reminder of what we went through in part one. I'll just go back. Sorry, my apologies. So why organizer goes to tender, what they look for, getting the basics right, understanding questions and objectives, and researching the client. So why organizations go to tender is a whole variety of reasons, but essentially for local authorities, it's because they have to. It has to be transparent. For commercial operations, is because they generally get a better deal and a better relationship if they go to tender, and it normally suits their business model. What they look for the right companies that understand what their aims are. That goes both local authority and or government and commercial. Getting the basics right is answering the questions. Make sure on the tender documents that you're answering everything they say. Understand what they're after. What's their long-term aim? And one of the ways of finding out what the long-term is to research the client. In the commercial world, there's a decent amount of research you can do on the net. In local government and national government, there is a huge amount of information available if you take the time to look it up. You can find out what their plans are for the next 5 years, what their business plan is, what their aims are, what their challenges are, and you can build that into your response. So a winning bid, the principal elements are the right price that follows the golden rules. Price is important. We'll get to that in more detail. So it directly answers the questions according to evaluation criteria. Yeah, it's answering the questions, absolutely essential. Shows understanding the broader needs and objectives, which you mentioned, and you can research those to find out. And in more detail, it demonstrates a credible, competent solution, confirms the benefits to the client, includes evidence to support and convince, and is written leanly, clearly, and precisely. In last week's session, we kind of covered these two. In this session, we're going to go into a bit more detail on these four. So the golden rule. Well, my golden rule above everything is to understand what the questions are, answer the questions, make sure that your answers are relevant, that you show the value that you offer, which is sounds like more than one rule, but it's to make it really, really clear what you can offer. What problem are you solving for them? So one of the ways to do this is really simple. How equals who plus what, when, where, and why. And this copywriting, which is what this is, there's a reason why copywriters are paid quite a lot of money, because it is a skill. And the skill is in getting across what you want to say in a simple but not simplistic fashion, a straightforward fashion. We're going to go into bits of this during this session as to how to make sure that your response is relevant and is crystal clear. So if we go through these, a complete description of how you'll execute the required work, and it needs to be really, really clear how you're going to do it. And it must be substantiated. It must be backed up with evidence of some kind to show that you've done it before, and you can show that with testimonials and case studies, etc. So who is actually doing it? They'll be very interested in the makeup of your company, who does what. They'll also be interested potentially in if you have one person does one particular job, which is key. What happens if that person's on holiday? What person if that goes sick? Do you have resilience? All these kind of questions they may well ask you. But you describe in detail how your team is built and who delivers what. What's the approach? What's the steps? What are your processes and your methodology? How do you deliver? If it involves materials and equipment, what's your supply chain like in order to deliver those? And what are your your SLAs? What are your service levels around it? Along with your service levels, what are your schedules? What milestones are you setting? What's your dates for deliverables, etc. So you can set this out so they see exactly what you're going to deliver when, and make sure it aligns with what their expectations and needs are. Where, if location is an issue, and obviously with local authority it tends to be, that involves the geographic location of your team members, what your geographic location as an organization is, um, everything depending upon the kind of contract that it is, of course, as to how relevant that is. But if it is relevant, you'll have to make it really clear. And then why do you do what you do? What's your rationale behind the way you deliver? What's the purpose of the specific task? In other words, what's the benefit? Why is it better to do it the way that you want to do it? How do you manage quality? How do you evidence everything you're saying here? And then what link can you do to the benefits and value? How does that affect them? So all the way through this is a case of how does this help your client? So if the client is a local authority, it's really, really clear, how does this solve a problem for them? And what makes you better than the other person or the other company that's responding. And your clarity of language and making sure everything you say is relevant is really, really key to your response standing out against somebody else's. So USPs is a phrase not about, as it says here, keyword is unique and it's used too casually. Yes, it is. We are unique. Why? Well, if you genuinely are unique, then you have a completely one-off solution that nobody else can offer what you offer. That is rarely the case, if we're honest. I'm not saying it never is, but it's rarely the case. So what you can do is, if it's not necessarily unique, your approach can be shown to be exceedingly relevant to what that company are after or what that tender is requiring. So it says that we can overcome the lack of uniqueness by being innovative in our approach to a standard procedure. Yeah, what do you do that improves that makes it more efficient, more cost effective? What processes do you have that just make it work that much better? So the advantage of doing that is that you can, even in a crowded market, and I'll give you an example of a crowded market with a company that I've worked with recently. They're in facilities management, essentially a cleaning company. That's a hugely, hugely competitive market where you don't have a unique solution. So this company, we worked hard and we looked at their process that made them so much more efficient, more cost effective. And we went on elements of their training and recruitment where they did have some really, really good process in because in cleaning, training and recruitment, or recruitment first and foremost, is actually their biggest issue. And that made them more relevant, as well as the fact they've been around 25 years and they had very, very good case studies. But we really worked on that element. So all clean companies recruit and train. They just showed that they did that in a very, very, very good way and could evidence it. So that's an example in a very crowded market. So what? Yes. So when you respond, you have a question in the tender documents and you answer it. And then you read it and you've got to put yourself in the position of the client, let's say a local authority. If they read that, can they just look at it and go, well, so what? The way to remove the so what is to put the benefit in and use that. You don't have to use this phrase, but an example is that, which means that. So we do this in this way. So that's fine. That's a statement. That's not a benefit. It's a factual feature, which means that we can deliver on time, cheaper, so whatever the benefit is, which means that gives you the option to then go, this is how this benefits you. And while you do not have to use those three words, it is something I suggest you keep in your mind whenever you're talking about what you can do and why it should be you, which means that is, what does that mean to the client? So the benefits are everything. Really, features is fine, but you have to balance it with a benefit. So have a think about this. There's only just a few of us this morning, but have a think about this. So what benefits does your solution have? And how can you explain the value added? So I'm going to give you a minute to have a think about that. And if you want to put some examples in the chat, you don't have to. It would be nice just with a few is just put, maybe have a think about what you and your company does or your business does, and what benefits does your solution have and how can you explain the added value. So I'm just going to take a quick drink and just have a think about that. And if you want to, just put something in the chat. There are no right, or could I just point out, there are no right or wrong answers here. This is just to get the conversation flowing. So while you're thinking about that, I'm going to give you some examples of what we call primary benefits. So there are more than this. This isn't absolutely exhaustive, but it gives you an idea. If you're looking at what you offer, what you do, what your service, what your product, what your business actually offers, these are some of the primary ones. So, hi, Dennis. Deliver savings that can be tracked by the finance team on a procurement as a service offering. Well, savings is always good. It's I suppose the only thing is you could be more specific about the savings and where that hits. But actually, yeah, if you can say you're delivering savings, then that's not so much as so what. Probably in your answer, obviously would want to know more detail. You don't have to share that with here, obviously. But yeah, something that actually delivers something. So a saving is a benefit, obviously. A really good example. Thank you. And the fact is that if you look at these, as it says, it reduces, eliminates costs. It shrinks or diminishes risk, and risk is a whole other subject in its own. But whatever the risk is, it improves staff morale. This is one of these things that you shouldn't ignore now. Well-being is incredibly important, as is social value, which is something for a later conversation. But that shouldn't be ignored now. This is a real benefit. Increases and grows turnover, delivers higher margins, increases productivity. You can see how this, so it has to be something. We're going to say, right, we do this, which delivers that, which does that, and how does that benefit, which means that to you, this is the benefit that you receive. And it's easy to do. And I've read lots and lots of tender responses over the years. And you would be amazed how often these benefits are missed off in the response. It's remarkable but true. People go on about we do this and we do that and we're great and everybody loves us and etc. And all those things are true, but what they miss out is, oh, this is how this is good for you. So you would try to, as it says there, try to chat something else to benefits. Find a method, measure, and quantify. Now that is important, right? So just going back to Dennis's comment there about finance, the fact is that the all contracts, but specifically, I'm going to talk about from a local authority and government point of view. They love things that are measured. They love something where you can quantify what you do with some metrics. And the way I've always described it is that with the government, this is at all levels, from a town council right up to national government, they're extraordinarily interested in how you do something, not just that you do it. They're like constant communication, and they're like figures, they're like metrics where possible, where you can show that you're delivering, how you're delivering, how you're doing against your milestones and whatever service measures or SLAs they put in there and whatever KPIs and all the other things that they might be part of this to measure you. And the more you can show that we can deliver these metrics, the stronger your response will be, because that's what they want to see. Especially if you can offer something over and above what they're asking. This is incredibly important, because what you've got to remember is that the way it works in local government and in national government is there are people kind of outside, or I suppose effectively above them, who want to be shown how successful something is. So they want to take your figures and then funnel them up to the next stage, so they can see, look, this is working well, and this is, or it's not working well, and this is what we're going to do about it. So metrics are really important, whatever you can show them. And the whole thing is designed to create a greater perception of value. And so coming back to your business, as much as you say, you to put yourself in the mind of the buyer, and you want to show also from your point of view, I would just say it reduces staff turnover. So following on Dennis, reduce staff turnover if we work with the team business. How can we show reduces staff turnover if we work with the team or business here? How can we show that? Well, I suppose you could show that by being some reasonable, educated work on the cost of retention as against recruitment. That would be one way of doing it. Recruitment is very expensive, so that would be one way off the top of my head of showing that. And show how reduce your recruitment costs would be my first thought. So this whole doing it works towards you showing how you are different, what the differentiator, what makes your response better than the one next to it. Bearing in mind, this process isn't like if anybody's ever sent their CV into something like Indeed, it goes in, gets sifted by an algorithm, and before it actually meets a person and either gets rejected or sent forward before anybody's actually seen it. For the time being, at least, I mean, it's possible it might change, but not for some considerable time. Your response to a tender is going to be analyzed by a human being, by a person, maybe by a panel, but it's going to be people that are going to read it. So you need to make that connection, and they need to see when they're reading through all these responses, why does yours stand out? So if it's over complex, it might get red penned. If it's not clear, it won't get red penned. If it's doesn't answer the questions, it's going to get red penned. What makes yours stand out? And these are the things, the benefits are one of the ways, and probably the key way of showing that actually, yes, we can see why working with you would be good. It's not the only thing. There are other elements, but that's incredibly important. You don't just list features, that the benefits of how you do what you do and why you do what you do benefit them and solve a problem for them. Yes, people buy what they believe. So your evidence can be testimonials, can be case studies, basically anything that shows that you can do what you say you can do, and hopefully you've done it previously, and this has been the result. And also the experience of your team. You know, if you're a newer company, you don't have huge amounts of testimonials, then the experience of your team, your previous experience is all incredibly important. But you need to do everything you can do to create trust and belief that you can deliver what you say you can deliver. So, what is your story? If asked, what would your clients say about you? And what would you want them to say? These are really, really good questions. These are really good marketing questions anyway, but these in this context, these are really, really good questions. So have a think about that. Your clients now, what would they say about you? And what would you want them to say? Is there a difference between those two things? Is their perception, if you think about it, different from what you would want, or is it exactly the same? You're completely aligned. These are good questions. And how can you transfer that to your new potential client with, say, a local authority? Let's say in Watford, what would you want them to say about working with you? And if you turn that around, you want them to say, well, we're a great company, that we're a trusted partner. We work with them, we understand what they're after, what their plans are, and we help them deliver that, is the kind of approach that a local authority would want to see. So here's a thought, and this is quite tough, I think, but hopefully getting in the headspace of the words matter, the way you respond matters. So how do you make what you say more believable, and how to back up those words? Now, I think the answers are already given, but just have a think about that. You don't have to be specific, but a general question here. When you're talking about what you do and what services you deliver, how do you make that believable? How do you get them to trust you? And how do you back up those words, which is all part of the same thing? Have a quick thought about that. And if you want to, put some examples in the chat. So while you're thinking about that, because I think that's something quite searching for you to consider. So we look at the type of evidence. So what we call objective evidence, which are those things you have, depending on your organization, depending on the industry that you're in. So you might have accreditations, which are always good. You might have regular audits, the results of which you can publish. You might have customer and market surveys, proof of concepts, or demonstrations or trials or feedback from those, testimonials, references, any awards, any press articles. You can offer site visits under certain circumstances, and you can also show and there are some contracts where financial guarantees are required. We're not going to go into the details of why with that, but there are certain ones where financial guarantees would be required depending on the kind of contract that it is. So that's objective. Okay. Business evidence would be strong case studies. And I'm just going to mention case studies and testimonials together because you should always aim for them to be a maximum of a year old. Try and keep the case studies you use and the testimonials relevant within the last year if possible. With some long-term ones, that isn't always possible, but use the last year if you can. So other business, your operating procedures, how you operate, and what your project methodologies are, and what you can show up as to how what you do, and that gets into why and how you do and how does that benefit. So case studies are combined with your operating procedures and project methodologies, how they work your case studies, how they benefited your customers up to this point. So your company evidence, your own data metrics and results, your trust me statements, just about you as a company, what your, not necessarily mission statements, you have to be very careful with them because they tend to be very high level, but what is it that's core to your company, your opinion on the industry that you're in and what you're doing, your own customer surveys, which you may already have, your own marketing. They don't want to see your brochure, but you can give, where relevant, you can talk about your own marketing, your policies, and also your CVs. So they will ask often about the CVs for the team that's delivering. In my experience, what they don't want is actually a CV. They don't want a full CV going back to your high school days or even college. What they want is what we would prefer to call a pen portrait, which is about relevant experience. So if your experience that you show on your CV, the details you put in there is what's relevant to this tender. If it's not relevant to it, then it's very likely it should be omitted. Just tell them what's required. Answer the question that it's a CV, but actually just give them the information they actually need that's relevant. Relevance is really important. If you can tell them something that you have done actually isn't relevant in any way, shape, or form, then consider omitting that. So, like I said, a pen portrait rather than a CV. The evidence from your sector, how well you understand the sector and industry that you're in. If there are standard industry procedures, you can trumpet the fact that you follow standard industry procedures. There's nothing, that's a good thing. If you use third-party equipment, what's the supply chain for that? Is this recognized as being the best and why? And standard service approaches that say that you work within. This is, in many ways, you can see this as a compliance thing, really, that what you're doing is you're compliant with the way the industry or that sector works where relevance, that rather than looking at it as a constraint, it's a positive because you follow these industry procedures and industry processes. So that's a trust mark, if you like. And then your operational evidence. So what process have you gone through to get to where you are? Over the last, say the company's been going 5 years and you started one way, 5 years later, you've honed and you've worked on your processes to get it so you deliver something in a particular way now. And what process have you gone through to do that? Over the period of the existing contract, what performance information will you supply? What satisfaction data do you have? What innovations or improvements, added value and innovations? Now, that fourth one there. One of the things where possible in a response is, say a contract, you're bidding on a contract, let's say for 3 years. Over those 3 years, what they'd really like to see is that not just you deliver, but you will try and look on a base of continuous improvement, that you will look to deliver obviously what the requirements are, but you'll look to improve, and all the way through it, you'll be constantly looking at how you can improve processes, how you can improve your supply chain, for example, how you can work more efficiently. Not saying you don't do that now, but if they will see a mindset that you're constantly trying to be better, that's a good thing. You're looking for innovation all the time. Issues and challenges and how you've resolved them. So this is misunderstood sometimes, that a challenge you've had previously, but you've dealt with, is a real positive. Because believe me, procurement departments, especially certainly within government, know full well there are problems. There are things that happen. There are bumps in the road, so to speak, and they know that the problems arise. How you deal with them is the most important thing. So if you can show we had dealt with one particular client, for example, we had this challenge, this is how we met the challenge, this is the result. And if you follow the STAR, the situation, task, the action, and the result, which is, so this is the situation, was the problem, this was the task that was required, this is the action that we took, and this is the result. And if you don't know that, if you've not heard before, the STAR framework is a very, very good way of answering questions like this. But actually owning up to the fact that you have had challenges and how you've dealt with them is a real positive. So don't brush over it, think everything has to be, every client with everything's always been perfect. You're actually missing an opportunity to show how you work with your clients and how good a partner you are with your clients and customers. So obviously customer commendations and positive quotes works with normally kind of not as detailed as a full testimonial, but anything you can use from end users and stakeholders that will show that you are a trustworthy and skilled organization to work with. So the evidence you provide. So I mentioned earlier the word relevant. Relevance is really important. So if we take something like a case study or a testimonial, there's no point in having a case study that if there are different elements to what you do and you're offering one particular element to deliver this tender response, don't include a case study that has nothing to do, that doesn't show the skills or the process or the delivery that you're gonna have for this contract. Don't do it. It's just a waste of time that won't make any sense. Make sure it's relevant, which means sometimes it's right. You've delivered it one way. You've responded to one tender, and for this one you need to rewrite it slightly. It's still accurate, still absolutely accurate, but rewritten sometimes. Rewrite a case study to make sure the focus of it is what's relevant to this tender. It's really important to just go, well, we did this last year, it's great, but actually, well, yeah, well, that's not what we were after, which makes actually is a negative. So don't just put in case studies and testimonials make sure they are relevant. That actually, so it's to do with the details on that contract, that helps deliver X. Not that it actually is Y, it has nothing to do with X, to be oversimplistic. Be as recent as possible. Like I said, maximum of 12 months. You spend time developing the evidence, making sure that it is relevant, because it does take time, including case studies, again, keeping the word relevant in mind, and include it in your planning process. This can't be skimmed over. There is a date for when your response has to be in, and it will not shift. It's highly unlikely to be moved. You certainly can't ask for an extension. If it says, let's say, for example, it's due in this Friday at 12 o'clock. At 12 o'clock is when that time ends, not 1 minute past 12, because certainly within local government, it won't be allowed to go any further. They have these cutoffs for a reason. So you have to build the time in to do this. I mean, there's something that we'll go into in some of the other sessions with brand doing to understand how building a simple spreadsheet and understanding what your timelines are. So for example, if any of us here had a tender response that had to be at 12 o'clock Friday, our plan would be that you'd have it ready for 12 o'clock Thursday, allowing for any other things that might come up in the meantime. Always plan to be at least a day ahead, because time runs away. This is far more time intensive than you might realize. So don't leave it to the last minute. Okay, writing. So again, we're getting into copywriting, about writing accurately, clearly, and concisely. Less is more is the rule when writing. Absolutely is the rule. You'll know sometimes you'll read something, and we're not talking about writing that, the kind of people that write novels, etc. I'm talking about when you read something, if you read instructions for something or direction on something, then you'll know sometimes if it's just too much, it's over flowery, for want of a better phrase, and there's too much description. Actually, what you want is just to know where you are. So there is ways of using language to make sure you get across exactly what you mean in the smallest amount of words as possible. One of the reasons for doing this is that sometimes in a response, they'll say you've got 500 words or less to respond to this. And that's not a target. You don't work up to 500 words, just say an absolute maximum. And if you've got something, and I remember my first response, and I'll put my hand up here, the first response I ever wrote, there was a question that I answered, and I'd written 1,200 words, and I was allowed 500. And that was a very, very tough lesson, because I put this, it was lots of detail, it was over complex. I had to cut it down and cut it down and cut it down and cut it down. So rather than do that, the aim is to write really clearly and concisely from the get-go. And less is more is the mantra. So you must connect, not distract. So if you're using overflower language, then you will distract from the message you're trying to get across. The message you're trying to get across is, we are the right company to work with. We are trustworthy. We are skilled, and we understand what you're trying to achieve, and we want to help you achieve that. So as it says here, the evaluator will not dig for your strengths. They want to jump off the page or jump off the screen. You make their job easy. You don't waste their time, and they genuinely will appreciate this. And with all this, you want to build empathy, so they see that, oh, you're a company that understands what we are trying to achieve, that you're supporting their goals, that you have shared values, that you're authentic. And in the middle of this is a human being, one or more people that are reading your response and want to feel all those things. This is beyond price and all and values, all those kind of things you need in order to make a human connection, because that's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with human beings. So, okay, so we're getting to now the more specifics about clear language. And these are traps we've all fallen into. Like I said, I will put my hand up. I've done all these things. Never use a metaphor, simile, or the figure of speech which you're used to seeing in print now. Just don't do it. Don't use. Um, never use long words when a short one will do. Absolutely, it's one of the best things. If you can put in a shorter word, do it. This isn't about being simplistic. Simple language is hard, right? It's a tough skill to learn. It does not mean that it's simplifying what you say, or rather making light of what you do. It's about getting it across in really, really clear language. If you can take a word out, always cut it out. Never use the passive when you can use the active, and we've got an example of that, I think, on the next slide. Never use a foreign phrase, a scientific word, or jargon if you can think of an everyday English equivalent. Write as you speak. Writing as you speak is quite hard. Again, I don't want to labor the point that it's very, very, but we speak as we're talking to somebody. We're able to have a conversation, and what you're trying to do is get that across, that clarity. What people do, and again, I fell into this trap, is you sit down and you start typing, and it becomes very formal very, very quickly. And somehow you lose the connection with the person that's reading. We've all done it. Whereas if you were writing a letter to a friend, I know that might be a slightly more extended example. None of us write letters to friends anymore, but then it would be clearer, and it would be more friendly. It doesn't mean it'd be right. I'm just trying to show the difference between the two. You don't want to be too formal. You want to be accurate, and you want to build that connection. But lastly, and I think this is kind of a kind of stolen from a George Orwell approach to writing. Break any of these rules rather than say anything outright irrelevant. Yes. So all of these, there are situations here where a long word is. I don't really think a metaphor or simile really should be used at all. Where a long word absolutely cannot be taken out because there's a specific reason. You can't cut the word out of a particular sentence. Where maybe the passive is essential. Again, I can't think of an example. This is a difficult one. Number 5 here: a foreign phrase, a scientific word, or jargon. Your company might have a technical solution, and if you ask the technical question and there's absolutely no way of answering that without giving a specific and slightly more technical answer, where you have to use a scientific word or a foreign phrase or some kind of industry jargon, if you have to, then find a way of then explaining it if it isn't actually, because what you can't do is assume knowledge. One of the things that you need to be aware of is that when you respond to a tender, and that tender goes to the procurement department generally, that's the point. It goes to the procurement department. They're not specialists in whatever area that it is that you're involved in. But so they need to understand it. There'll be another team probably who are experts. But if you assume knowledge, I think, or they'll know what this is, you might get a bit of a shock that you need to, as if they don't know anything, and you're making sure they understand, which is the reason why you should always avoid this, because assuming knowledge can come across really, really badly. So this goes for every single sector. So don't use a term that you understand completely. I'm going to use a daft example. It's from my mum, of all people. Years ago, my mum worked in a jeweler. She loved jewelry. She's very, very good at selling jewelry. Worked for a manufacturing jeweler, old style jeweler. And she would talk about some of the rings being CZ. And CZ is cubic zirconia. Now, most people know that. But her boss points out at the time that you're using it. This is a very, very simple thing. Cubic zirconia, people knew what that was, or most people did. And you can explain it was a laboratory diamond, etc. But CZ, which she understood, nobody got it. And it's a tiny little example. But she mentioned a few times that she'd it's a very easy try. My mum, would not write anything. She's a very good writer of letters, but not something like this. She'd never considered doing it. But it's a real simple example of something she used as a phrase, and she just assumed other people would understand what it is. And that's a really simple example, because I want you to think about that when you write, because anything you assume, well, that's just an industry thing. be careful because it's a real trap to fall into. Right, so passive rather than active writing. So, an example, Oliver Twist was written by Charles Dickens is the passive. Charles Dickens wrote Oliver Twist is the active, and it's less words and it's much more direct. It's the same thing, but it's way more direct. The opera singer was heckled by an onlooker in the crowd. It's passive. An onlooker in the crowd heckled the opera singer. Active, a do. What was done? What did somebody do? Is active, and it tends to be less words. Not always, but it tends to be less words that does active rather than passive writing. And that, again, very simple examples. And this isn't a copywriting course, so we go into a lot more detail. But these, what we're trying to do here is just, hopefully, just raise a few things about thinking, right, okay, when we're looking to write a bid response, these are the things that you need to keep everything really, really, really simple. Avoid jargon, Americanisms, and hyperbole. Yes. So don't over exaggerate. You know, this is I look at this. You know, I love that because that's that on many levels that works. So don't use phrases to overemphasize because it doesn't work. And this is the reason why we now know that there's the dictionary now has a completely different definition of the word literally because the way that it's used. So there is literally no word for literally in the way that we were brought up. It's a fact. And that word's been kind of ruined. And is an example. We need to be careful of putting words in that don't make any sense with what you're saying and don't help. Basically, if it doesn't help, take it out. And avoid, yeah. I mean, I'm hoping that in written things you'd never do this. Random capitalization. And here's a terrible. I think we've all seen that. It's terrible. For some reason, you look at that and it just doesn't sit well with the eyes. Look at that; it doesn't read well. And things like that. Be careful. I would say, I think we mentioned this last week. One of the most important things when you do all this response and you write everything, you answer your questions, you did is to then get somebody else who hasn't been involved in writing them to go through it and see if they get it and if they spot and everything, and to not be too precious about this because it needs to be someone who goes, right, I get this or I don't get it. Because if they don't get it, then you rewrite it. So having that person outside the person or people who write the response to double check what you're saying that isn't necessarily as technically proficient or as knows actually, if they don't know the detail at all, that'd be a really, really good thing. Because they would hopefully pick up on something and say, well, I don't understand what you're saying. And that's a red flag for you. Or that doesn't read very well. Okay, just let me, there we go. Yes, avoid writing we would, can, could, we propose to. That all sounds quite weak. Whereas if you say we can, we will, we have done, you know, so not brand doing is running the workshop. Brand doing are running this workshop. And again, it's a very, very simple example of the difference in writing something positive rather than either negative or in the past tense. So I don't necessarily, this is not something really that's easy to do within the session, but I'd like you to just read through, if you would, just read through that paragraph. Give you a second just to have a read through it. So I think we've all read things like this before. It's the kind of thing you see in annual reports and things that we've, you know, it's accurate. It provides information. Is it particularly easy to read? I wouldn't say so. You might have to read it a couple of times to actually understand what's being said here. So again, this is a trap that's easy to fall into. As while this is accurate, understanding is less clear. So let's have a look at this. And what we're looking here is what we think here are the most important elements. So we take the most important elements and what point elements aren't. So take into consideration, as an example, that's not an important element. That's hyperbole. It's too fluffy. So we take all these important elements you end up with this shorter paragraph that says exactly what that one does. And there's an example of a very formal sentence. I mean, I wouldn't advise writing anything like this in a bid response. This more likely if it's a very specific question, but these aren't bid response questions. These are just something to give you about the language. So that's really, really clear. Talking about your company, really, really clear. Whereas this says the same thing, but like I said, you'd have to read it more than once, maybe 3 times to actually go, what on earth are they talking about? And also, less than half the number of words. And that, again, for the reasons said from a clarity point of view and also the limitations you might have in your response, this really matters. So here's good examples. There are lots and lots of them, and I'm not going to go through everyone. But if you look at this and go, right, okay, are they, if at all possible, and if possible, this is something I used to use a lot. I used to use phrases like that all the time. And I think I probably do when I'm speaking. But in writing, there's just no need. If possible is fine. You don't need at all. Has an ability to, can, on 2 separate occasions, twice. I have a particular hatred for the fact that for some reason twice is a word that seems to be taken out of the vocabulary, and we hear 2 times all the time, which is I know you have 2 times on also, which I think is an Americanism. But anyway, take into consideration versus consider. Take into consideration sounds like a really, really strong word, but actually, if you think about it, it's not necessary. So there are lots and lots and lots of examples, but any way where you can look at this and going, during the month of April, in April, as an example, on a regular basis, regularly. These are really simple, but they make a real difference to how difficult something is to read and understand. So, and to use sentences here. As an added bonus, obviously that would be as a bonus, so we would take the N out. There's no need for these extra red words, the words in red. It was during the day. It was during the course of the day. There's absolutely no need for anything in red here. There is no need for. I do have a particular fondness for this one. It is mostly foreign imports because, as far as I'm aware, unless I'm missing something, all imports by definition are foreign. So these being said, but these are all superfluous, all of them. And again, 2 things: A, it affects the clarity of what you're saying, but also, it's I can just Shantanu. I think I said last time I really do hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Legalese, yes, legalese are just it's very, very important. If absolutely necessary, but you can always simplify everything. And if you have to use a phrase, then put which means that and explain. Yeah, legalese is very easy to fall into. So anything here in red you don't need. So like I was saying, it benefits in clarity, but also if you have word limitations, it's the easiest way to cut your word count down is to remove anything like this. And to point out fewer words, the person reading it or the people will really appreciate it being written clearly, accurate, leanly. They'll get into the detail of what you're actually saying rather than having to fight through what you're talking about. And it is a potential differentiator. It absolutely is. Being a differentiator, especially in a crowded market, is a really, really big deal. And what we say is that excellent bid responses tend to win, poor ones tend to lose. And one of the principal differentiator between an excellent bid response and a poor one is the clarity and quality of the writing and making sure you answer the question in full in the clearest, most accurate, and most lean way that you possibly can. So it gets it across really, really well. Now, what you're saying really matters, obviously, which is what comes down to relevance and what the making sure that the benefits and your value proposition understood. But the way you get it across, you could have the best proposition going. You could be absolutely the #1 company, the perfect fit. But if you don't get this across in a really accurate, clear, clean way, and somehow your value is lost in complex or superfluous language, you will miss the opportunity because it hasn't come across well. You need to sell yourself. It's a different kind of selling, and it's a selling based upon clarity and transparency and ease of understanding. So there's quite a lot in things we've gone through over these two sessions. So the summary of what kind of things that we've gone through, everything in your response has to satisfy that ITT, which is the invitation to tender, which is the first start, the first set of documents you receive on a tender response. That it answers why you. Why is it that your company, your business, you as a person, why is it that they should be looking to use you? And you give them clear reasons. That you use all your language, it focuses on the client. Everything is about them. How do you meet their challenges? How are you going to help them solve their problem? How are you going to be their partner? Almost like you're going to put your arm around them, we're going to work together. How do you get that across? That your solution is compelling, that it shows the benefits, that it shows the value, is priced correctly. It doesn't mean the cheapest, it means it's priced correctly and you've justified your price. That it's well written, it's consistently written. So the consistency thing, it could be that you have 2 or 3 different people working on the tender response, but ideally it has to actually be put together by one person because it needs to read as if it was written by one person. That can be, you don't have to get through suddenly 3 or 4 pages into what your response and it just reads differently because it was written by somebody else. That is something also to be one voice all the way through it. That it's easy to understand, is succinct, absolutely complete. You don't skim anything. You've answered everything that they said. It's very easy to evaluate using the criteria that they've laid out, answers a question, the structure that you'd answer in the way. If they have specific ways you have to answer a question or you have to provide evidence, then you do that. That you evidence, if you have any claim of uniqueness, that they can back it up. You can back up your capabilities, your skill set. How can you show your differentiation or value supported by evidence, which means your approach believable and that you are a low risk to them. So they're spending, and I know a lot of these applies to commercial tenders as well. But while we're focusing on, yeah, okay, all right, Dennis, I am hoping to be there. Yes, the claims of uniqueness and your factual evidence and all that shows you as a low risk. If you've never worked in that with the local authority before, then they want to work with people that they think are still, for one thing, going to be around in a few years' time. They don't want to have something go wrong that they then have to reprocure because that's expensive and messy. They want to work with somebody that wants to work with them and that they can trust will do a good job. So your evidence is everything. Okay, yes, I suppose ultimately it isn't the taking part, it's the winning that matters. That absolutely is. You get better at this. It's a learned skill. You always ask for, if you're unsuccessful in a tender response, then you will sometimes be provided to, but you always ask for feedback to find out where you're stronger and weaker so you can improve your response. They will always respond to that, will always give you feedback. Because it's in their interest to find the best answer. They're spending public money, they're spending our money. And I said, one of the things I think is important for all those business owners that work in the public sector is that you have 2 hats on. You have the hat on where you are a business owner, that you're wanting to be your business to grow and be successful, but you also pay your taxes, your council tax, etc. So they're spending your money if you're working within that same area. So you want it to be spent properly with the right companies on the right things. And if you put those 2 things together, try and wear both those hats, if you like, while you're responding, because ultimately, for a local authority, their customer are you and me, homeowners, business owners in the local area. So that's who they're looking to please, and they're delivered by people that are paying the council tax. They obviously have their national government masters as well, but that's their customer, and you want to be a supplier to help deliver something for their customer, which is where the research comes in. It's a mindset change from a normal commercial operation, normal commercial customer you may have had in the past. So where do you find opportunities? Well, all local authority websites have a section which may well be called Work with Us, or something along those lines, where you'll be able to see everything that's coming up in now and in the future. You'll have to be able to see what has been delivered previously, be able to see their business plan and their focus for the next few years. So council websites are an invaluable source of information. There are other things you can go to, Find a Tender and Contract Finder, which are both government websites where you can find tenders on there. They are about to be updated later this year into one, with the change in some of the legislation. But local authority websites are a great source of information to find out what opportunities are available. So you'll see, obviously, this is an older one, what their pipeline is. So you'll be able to see what they're looking for now and what's coming up in the future, which is really, really good to know. So you can think, right, okay, there's something happening in the next 3, 4, 5, 6 months, or even next year that we can be involved in, and we can find out more information. So there is they Meet the Buyer event on the 13th of November. I am intending to be there. I'm looking forward to that. These Meet the Buyer events are, if you get nothing else, and there's so much to get out of this entire program, but the Meet the Buyer events are a fabulous thing, and of real value to be in the same room as people, have conversations with these procurement people, because and they're there to remember they've no axe to grind. They're there, they want the best people to supply to them, so they're interested in what you've got to say on what service you offer, and what product, etc., that you offer. They're really keen to talk to you, and these are really great. So I implore you, if you're able to make the time to go to this event in next month. So one of the things you invited to is your 2 confidential one-to-ones, and certainly on the initial one, that we're putting together your action plan as to build your action plan as to what your action plan is. I said action plan 3 times now. I was like, I can't get off that phrase. Sorry. What your plan is to get into this market, how you're looking to implement all your processes and how you're going to get your value across, and also things that we would like to know, things like, it's going to generate more jobs, etc. This all becomes part of your plan, to going forward, and this is really quite a useful tool for you and for us to support you going forward into growth. So those one-to-one sessions, they're quite positive. They're like 55 minutes long. You'll be sent an invite, get your invite responded to, and take advantage of both those sessions, which say one-to-one and bespoke to you, where we learn about you specifically. So obviously you're already part of the program, but Tracy at Brand doing there, and there's both number and website, and email address rather. So the skills webinars are on. You can book the one-to-one advice sessions. You can submission an expression of interest for major construction projects, which we're involved with and we know the details are, and you can be helped to develop a winning bid. It's a great program for all of you to take advantage of. It isn't just about major construction projects. It just happens to be that's one of the things that can be done, but there are obviously lots and lots of other tender responses around. Okay, so that is a lot. We've got to exactly 12 o'clock. I do have a bad habit of overrunning, so I've just about made it. What I would say is, first off, thank you very much for listening to me for the last hour. In the very short time we've got, I know time is tight, but if there's anybody who wants to ask any questions, feel free to put something in the box now. Alternatively, feel free to reach out to Brandon and your contact there with any other future questions. We'd be happy to answer. I do hope that kind of brief run through about how to respond and how to deal with and how to communicate your response to a tender has given you some things to think about. And how long are these one-to-one sessions? They're available. Well, I don't think there's a limit on them. So I think I have my my calendar for mine open, I think, for the next 6 months minimum. So we'll try and get the session in as early as you can. If you just let them know that you can't, it might not be with me, Shantanu. So if we have a list. So if it's under me, I will be sharing it with you. I'll be doing that over the next couple of days. If it's not with me, then you should be reached out. But if you're on my list, I will obviously share my calendar link with you. Thank you very much for your time. Anything else, feel free to contact us. This session will be going up on the website on YouTube in the next few days. Thank you very much. You take care and have a really good day.